I was recently involved in a worker strike, and in this video, I want to talk about the ethics of strike action, and I will be looking at an African Christian ethical analysis of labor disputes. I want to argue that from an African Christian ethical perspective, a strike can be a morally justifiable act of social transformation, but its legitimacy is not automatic. Therefore, it is contingent upon a confluence of factors: the righteousness of its cause, for example, the morality of its methods, its status as a last resort, and most critically, its ultimate orientation towards the restoration of justice and the common good. I will synthesize theoretical frameworks from African Christian ethics, Kunyihop, biblical theology, Hayes, and also the moral theology, Odozo, with an analysis of the Kenyan context. First, I want to begin by defining what a strike is. And according to Kunyop, a strike is a collective withdrawal of labor by workers designed to pressure employers into meeting specific demands. A strike is purposefully disruptive, and in most democratic societies, strikes exist within a legal framework. In addition, strikes are also conflict oriented or as a result of conflict. Now, I want to take us to look at some of the advantages of strike. Now, one of the biggest advantage of strikes is promoting fair labor practices and dignity of workers. So strikes are huge when it comes to promoting fair labor practices at the workplace through a CBA. And also, that also promotes the dignity of workers. Secondly, strikes strengthen worker solidarity and collective identity. So it enables workers to come together and understand that they're doing it for the community, for themselves as a community of workers. And therefore, that helps with forging a collective identity. Thirdly, strikes bring systemic injustices to public awareness. And that is because most of the times, strikes will always attract the media. And once these issues are heard, then the public is aware of some of the injustices or systemic injustices that are in some organizations uh, in the country. When we look at the disadvantages of strikes, one of the biggest disadvantages of a strike is the fact that strikes harm innocent third parties. So when lecturers go on strike, students will incur harm as a third party. When doctors go on strike, patients will incur some harm as third parties, as innocent third parties. Another disadvantage of a strike is that it has significant economic costs. In Kenya, I'm told that if dock workers put down their tools for just 30 minutes, that costs East African economy billions of shillings. And therefore, strikes in their nature have a significant economic cost. Another disadvantage of strikes is that they have potential for violence. And therefore, sometimes strikes can spiral into violence, and this erodes their moral legitimacy. And finally, strikes strain relationships between workers and their employers, and this might not be a very good thing at the workplace. Now, after looking at the advantages and disadvantages of a strike, I want to look at some of the classical ethical theories that have been applied to strikes. And the first one, I'm going to look at natural law theory. This theory focuses on universal moral principles, and it argues that us as human beings should flourish. And therefore, that provides a strong foundation for justifying strikes under certain conditions. At its core, natural law affirms the inherent dignity of the human person and the right to pursue well being, which includes just remuneration and safe working conditions. The second theory classical theory that I want to look at is the deontological ethics. And deontological ethics is concerned with duty and moral rules. And this presents a stark conflict in the context of strikes. A deontological analysis would therefore demand that a strike only be undertaken after all other duties or means have been exhausted. So participation in is ethically permissible only when conducted with legal frameworks, with peaceful intentions, and as a last resort. Thirdly, I want to look at the virtue ethics, and this ethics shifts the focus from actions to character, asking what kind of moral agents we become through our choices. And participating in a strike can be an expression of cardinal virtues, such as courage, justice, and solidarity. And it can also cultivate a character oriented toward communal well being and righteous defiance. And last, I want to look at situation ethics. And Joseph Fletcher, in his situation ethics, argues that we should evaluate actions based on a single principle, and that is agape love. In his framework, a strike is ethical only if it aims to achieve the most loving outcome for all stakeholders. And the abstract rule of other systems are subordinate to the command to love one's neighbor. Now, I want to look at another framework of theory, which is liberation ethics and African Christian ethics. Now, liberation theology is born from context of oppression and provides a powerful justification for strikes. In fact, it argues that the Bible, through the experience of the poor and marginalized, and emphasizes God's preferential option for the poor. From this perspective, therefore, strikes are not merely permissible, but can be morally imperative acts of liberation when they confront oppressive and exploitative systems. Now, under Kunyihop's African Christian Ethics, he says that work provides the most relevant um, in his framework, and I think this is the main framework for my argument in this video, because Kunyihop actually provides some of the most relevant and nuanced framework for my analysis. African Christian ethics is rooted in the Trinity of community, justice, and the pursuit of harmonious relationships. Ubuntu. Unlike Western individualism, the community is the primary locus of moral decision making. Therefore, a strike must be evaluated not on its benefit to individuals, but on its impact on communal welfare. Therefore, for Kunyihop, a strike is ethically defensible when it meets these four requirements. One, it must seek to restore communal justice. And two, it must employ peaceful and truthful means. Three, it must minimize harm to the vulnerable within the community. And four, ultimately, it must aim to reconcile the parties involved and to bring more harmony in future. Now, I want to shift and look at a biblical and African Christian synthesis. Now, the classical ethical theories, which of course I've analyzed, they provide the analytical tools. But for a Christian operating within an African context like myself, a more integrated framework is necessary. So, by synthesizing Richard Hayes' 1996 threefold biblical model, that is the cross, the community, and the new creation, with the communal justice-oriented ethics of Kunyihop 2019, we can construct a robust and contextually sensitive guide for ethical discernment regarding strikes. Now, Hayes' biblical model, when applied to labor conflicts, probably this is how it would look like. Number one is the cross. And the cross stands as the definitive symbol of God's solidarity with the suffering. And this is decisive confrontation with the powers of sin and injustice. So a Christian ethic shaped by the cross cannot remain neutral in the face of exploitation. It must take the side of the oppressed. Number two, when you look at the community, Hayes emphasizes that New Testament envisions the Christian life as life within a reconciled and reconciling community. This has direct implications for strikes, especially in essential services. The biblical call to love your neighbor as yourself in Mark 12:31, and to prioritize the list of these according to Matthew 25:40 creates a strong ethical imperative to consider and impact to consider the impact of a strike on the wider community, particularly the most vulnerable. And finally, when we look at the new creation, according to Hayes, Christian ethics is fundamentally eschatological, and that is, it's oriented towards God's ultimate redemption and restoration of all things. This new creation perspective, that is 2 Corinthians 5:17, judges all present actions by their alignment with God's future of shalom, that is wholeness, justice, and peace. A strike, therefore, should not be an end in itself. Its ultimate goal must be transformation and reconciliation, and not just merely victory. Now, if I were to weave Hayes' biblical themes together with Kunyihop's African Christian ethics, then I think this would allow me to propose a set of independent criteria for evaluation, for evaluating the ethical permissibility of a strike. So at least I think if I were to bring those together, then I would be talking about a few items that would qualify an ethical strike. And one of them is that the strike should be under a just cause. And a just cause would meet the criteria for the cross and justice. Number two, it must have the right intention. And this would meet the aspects of new creation and reconciliation. Third, it must be as a last resort. And this would meet Hayes and Kunyihop's prudence and community aspects. Number four, it has to be proportionate. And that means that this would meet the aspect of community and the common good. Number five, it has to have the right authority. It has to be legal. And that would meet the aspect of community or Ubuntu. Number six, a strike must be peaceful. It has to have peaceful means. It must be done through peaceful means. And this meets the aspect of the cross and harmony. And lastly, a strike must be reasonable. There has to be a reasonable prospect of success. And this meets the aspect of prudence. So we cannot, as Christians, just conduct a strike which we know very well is not going to succeed. We must have reason to believe or a prospect that it will succeed. Finally, as I conclude, I want to talk about the alternatives to strikes. And one of the alternatives to strikes is dialogue and negotiation. We can also use mediation and arbitration in the space of strike. Third, we can look at a robust collective bargaining agreement. Fourth, we can look at the policy and legislative reform. So organization can reform their policies. Fifth, we can look at actually internal conflict resolution mechanisms. So organizations can have internal conflict resolution mechanisms that do not lead to strikes. And lastly is peaceful protests. So you can just peacefully protest outside or inside the workplace, and that would not really qualify as a strike. And therefore, I want to conclude there. And I want to conclude by